Hi guys, welcome to week 2 of professional issues. We're going to talk about boundaries, communication, and dual relationships. So follow along with your readings if you are able to. Also keep in mind that quiz 1 is now available. Posting for module 2 is up in the discussion board, and you have access to your policy statement project, which is due on February 24th, the last day of class. So let's get right into it. We have probably heard the term boundaries before, and maybe you've heard it in the sense of like protecting your boundaries, keeping good limitations on relationships or how much access people have to you. So this is a term I feel like that's been commonly used in the last few years, and we might all be aware of what that means. And so as it pertains to relationships, it separates person from person. It also is protecting our integrity of each person, what our beliefs are, our values, what the truth is for us. And a boundary can be something like very tangible, like the skin or clothing or a surface. And it can also be intangible, like an attitude. You go to approach somebody and introduce yourself and say hello, and right as you walk up to them, they kind of turn their head, lose eye contact, look the other way. That's more of an intangible boundary. This person doesn't want to speak to you. When we understand that boundaries are a crucial role to our ethical practice and building professional relationships, this is how we can really use it to our advantage to ensure that we stay professional, that we stay safe, and that we uphold our industry standards all of the time. So when it comes to boundaries, we have our personal space, and that's the area that you feel completely under control. That's going to look different for everybody. Some people have a much bigger, like invisible bubble around them when it comes to personal space. And think of a time when you've had somebody invade your personal space. With that being said, there might be certain people that you allow in this personal space and then others that you don't. And so often we don't even know that we have a boundary unless they're threatened or crossed. So every day we're making boundary decisions like who we greet with a smile or a handshake, hug, kiss, or we do just the opposite with or somewhere's in between. And they're idiosyncratic because they reflect all of our likes, dislikes, cultural background, temperament, history, and you're going to see that they change depending on the situation. Sometimes a behavior is completely appropriate and called for, and then that same behavior in a different setting can become highly offensive. So I'm sure you can think of examples of that. We do have different types of boundaries. So we're talking about like the physical boundaries, which again all of these can be tangible and intangible. We have emotional, intellectual, sexual, and energetic. And the boundaries are going to vary. There's going to be discrepancies in their permeability, as in how easily they can be crossed or how much we need to put into the effort to keep them closed. So this is where we see, depending on certain circumstances with certain people and different environments, there's types of boundaries are all going to be different. So when it comes to our physical boundaries, we have that comfortable distance that we keep between us. American culture was 2 to 3 feet, maybe arguably a little bit more now, and 1 foot to the side. So about 2 to 3 feet in front or behind you. So thinking of like when you're standing in a grocery line, and maybe like you think of this even like before COVID. And if somebody was standing in line behind you at the grocery store, ATM, and they're closer than 2 to 3 feet behind you, it is going to feel kind of uncomfortable, right? Especially a stranger, like what is this person doing? So generally though, we allow somebody that we like or we know well to move closer than you would if it was a stranger. And in our treatment room, clothing is also a large physical boundary. So we think of like when a client does have their clothes on still, we're talking to them, we're discussing the treatment plan, what's about to happen, they leave their clothes on, we step out of the room after letting them know that they can undress to their comfort level and what that looks like, explaining to them that it's okay if they want to take off like their bra, underwear, pants, socks, whatever, letting them know that they're always covered by the linens until we go to work on an area, and we would still never expose breast tissues or genitals or anything like that. And really having that discussion with clients, especially the first time you work with them and then even subsequent times, because we don't know, even if they've had massages before, how well that was explained. And sometimes people forget. And so they need a reminder, and clothing being that large physical boundary. With that being said, we do not work under people's clothing without their permission. And if they continue to wear clothes like pants or socks or underwear, we respect that physical boundary. We can perhaps work over the area with communication and asking them for consent to work over that area, but you never work under their clothes ever, unless you have explicit permission from them to adjust clothing. But really that conversation should happen before they get on the table and not while they're on the table, because now we have that power differential that where the therapist who's standing up fully clothed, they're undressed partially on the table, laying down vulnerable. And now we're going to say something to them like, oh, we can get better access to your glutes if we work underneath your underwear. Well, now you've already got them in this vulnerable situation. It's really not ideal. And so we're going to treat clothing as a large physical boundary, that we don't work under it. We also can work over clothing, but we need to have communication with our clients on that, because maybe they want that area avoided and that's why they have clothing on. Also, having great communication and a thorough explanation of all body parts that will be worked on before treatment is ideal, and that's how we get consent. Our emotional boundaries are defined by emotions and how they feel in that moment. So emotional boundaries are very much susceptible to change, and they're going to change with each situation. Intellectual boundaries are our thoughts, beliefs, opinions, and this forms our identity. They help us create that view that we have of the world and help us differentiate and separate ourselves from others. So when our beliefs or our ideas are ridiculed, criticized, dismissed, punished, ignored, that sense of self becomes shaken and we become more hesitant to speak openly about our ideas. And there might be times where you think of like where you can share your own personal beliefs and opinions, because maybe you can have those types of conversations with those people. Maybe they're on the same page as you. But if you do this enough where you start to become apprehensive to sharing, it's usually because there's been that ridicule or letdown in the past. And we have our sexual boundaries. They're determined with whom, when, and where, how we express our sexuality. And this is going to be determined on the context of the relationship. So should health practitioners have sexual relations with their clients? The answer is no. And if you become romantically involved with any one of your clients, at that point, the client relationship needs to be terminated, and then you can move forth with a romantic or sexual relationship. However, it is a very gray area of where that unethical role begins to come into play. So if you are introduced to somebody because they're your client, and then they ask you or you ask them to go on a date, let's keep it PG-13, they're going to go on a date together. At that point, you need to terminate the relationship, but you're still held responsible as a professional. So by like you initiating this relationship, the client relationship needs to be terminated before any sort of romantic or sexual relationship can begin. And also, there's still professional backlash that can come of this. Like relationship doesn't work out. Now, all of a sudden, you've got a disgruntled client who can then potentially go after or sue somebody for sexual allegations during their treatment prior to being asked out romantically. So they say just things to consider. I would not advise anybody to get involved romantically or sexually with any of their clients. And it would be a violation of the law if that client relationship never was terminated. We are not allowed to make any sexual type of advances on our clients. And so with that, there's going to be differentiating laws and violations state to state. But as far as making any sexual advances on a client, that would be in violation with the law and ethics of your profession. And then we have our energetic boundaries, and there's that constant flow of energy around every human, and the energy patterns of one person can influence those of another. So we need to be aware of that so we don't take on our clients' energy and we don't allow what they're experiencing to really then change the way that we're experiencing life. And it's important that we have those strong grounding practices to ensure that we protect ourselves and also that we are not pushing our energy onto our clients. I do think, though, that being somebody who is positive, optimistic, willing to help, there are some like really great attributes that coming from that disposition and that type of energy that I personally think is great to spread to your clients, to the people that you meet. But you can do that in a way without being forceful, and you can do that in a way that is helpful and beneficial, and it's not intended to cross any sort of boundaries. So, and when it comes to our boundary models, we have permeable, semi-permeable, and rigid. And so noticing when you feel these ways are going to be really helpful. So sometimes we are very permeable and we are around people or in environments where it feels very flowing and easy without any sort of barriers. Semi-permeable is flexible to the outside world, but still allowing some closeness when appropriate and keeping somebody at a distance when necessary. And then we have our rigid, where we are limiting the flow of information in and out. So just noticing throughout your day when you have those boundaries come up. And interactive boundaries are all about meeting at the boundary, communication, using the appropriate amount of pressure, meeting the client at his or her boundary. And with boundary crossing or violation, this is when there's an overlap. A person experiences discomfort when it comes to pressure, or they experience the perception of being attacked, and this can be in any sort of those ways that we discussed before: emotionally, physically, energetically, social, sexually. And so then we have distance from the boundary, and there's no meaningful contact, meaning like communication attempts are incomplete and not successful. So in reality, these boundaries are always in fluctuation, and they can quickly change from rigid to permeable depending on context, situation, environment, relationships, like literally anything, your mood that day, all the things. So one type of boundary is no better than another. It's not like we have these like ideals. We need each type of boundary to suit the situation or context. So boundaries must be kept contextually appropriate as a professional. So just thinking too of like how are our boundaries developed, and these are some examples of how they come about. Some of them are innate and some we learn. So boundary crossing and that transgression may or may not be experienced as harmful. So I'm sure there's been times where you've felt like your boundaries were crossed, but you were able to go on throughout your day. Maybe you were like, okay, this person didn't know, like that was a hard no for me. Maybe like you put yourself in their shoes and you're just like, yeah, like they did not mean anything by that. And other times it can be extremely harmful. And it's relative. What is a mere boundary crossing to one person can be a major violation or crossing to another. But either way, a boundary violation is a harmful transgression. So there's some examples in your book here on inappropriate touch and careless or uninvited words, dual relationships leading to sexual misconduct, inappropriate self-disclosure, and energetic complications. So check those out and let me know if you have any questions on any of those. And these are some ways to avoid crossing boundaries. So when we have an increased empathetic awareness around clients' experiences. So empathy is having that understanding, putting ourselves in somebody else's shoes, and we're going to take action to better manage our own and our clients' energy fields. So that's going to look different for everybody. What those techniques are, we've talked about those over the last couple of years. Enhanced skills for identifying clients' behaviors that indicate cross boundaries. So figuring out, when all of a sudden, that client doesn't rebook and they've been coming all the time, or they start to shift the way that they like talk to you, or maybe they hold their breath, or maybe all of a sudden they're pulling the sheets up closer to them, or things like that. Ask questions that identify when clients' boundaries may have been violated, because if you don't ask, sometimes you don't know. And then teaching clients how to identify and establish their own boundaries, and they can learn by example, by the things that you're doing, and encouraging our clients to articulate their experience so they feel safe. And as far as establishing our boundaries, location of services should be in a professional area, interpersonal space, that power differential, space boundary. Our appearance is important, being professional in our hygiene. Self-disclosure is going to help limit work-related issues. We should speak audibly and be easy to understand through our language. Touch to establish safety and reassurance around that. And as far as time goes, lateness, but also not going over, because now this can seem like a little unprofessional. Are you doing this person a favor? Also, like we all have places to go and be, and this is the time that they signed up and allotted for. And that exchange of money also reinforces our business and our boundaries. So continue to read on boundaries in your book, and we will shift gears over to communication. So these go hand in hand, communication and boundaries. We need to have effective communication in order to uphold our boundaries. But when it comes to communication, it's not just what we're speaking. We also have nonverbal communication, right? So verbal would be our spoken and written language. Nonverbal is going to be everything else, our gesture, body language, posture, facial expression, eye contact, and then our object communication, like clothing, hairstyles, behavior. That all plays into the role of communication. There are boundaries and barriers that are really effective when it comes to communication when we're trying to express. And this can be misunderstood due to our choice of words, delivery, tone, voice, cultural differences, and many other factors. So as far as communication goes, there are certain characteristics that are going to help you communicate better and minimize any communication barriers. So to be aware of different learning styles like auditory, kinesthetic, visual, and as you're with your client until you really understand them more, I think it's important for you to give all of these options. So maybe you just give the example of showing them and telling them how to get undressed to their comfort level when you step out of the room. And so you're speaking it, but you're also visually showing them to get in between the sheets. And you might even have them walk over and touch that area in between the fitted and the flat sheet. So that way they have a very good auditory, kinesthetic, and visual understanding of that. You also want to set and maintain your appropriate boundaries, going back to that, being assertive and clear in what you want, and not just saying yes. If you have like reservations, don't be a yes man. You have to know when it is appropriate to say no. And that is meant to protect you and to have strong communication. Don't say yes to things that you don't want to do. Being constructive with criticism and feedback, and then appropriately expressing and receiving anger and other irritations, being aware of your own patterns of communication, taking a responsibility for that, having that empathy, and having clear policies that are there and enforced to establish those client relationships. Another thing that we need to be aware of is emotional release. It is not uncommon, and sometimes having the somatic body work can really bring up old memories or trauma that's been stored deep within the body and the tissues, and during massage or during touch in general. Sometimes clients just have it happen because they're in a safe space. And so it could include crying, anxiety, anger, intense memories. And sometimes the signs look like holding their breath, clenching their fists, feeling numb, skin discoloration, sweating, nausea, erratic movements, avoidance of eye contact. And so what you want to do is always keep everything client centered and focused. And if they are not okay with continuing their session, you need to respect that. But also, maybe they just need some space to take a couple of breaths, calm down, relax. I would also highly recommend a referral to somebody who is more well-equipped, mental health counselor, and somebody who specializes in somatic release, somebody that you would trust and refer a client to. So if we have that happen, we acknowledge that there is emotion. Don't just like keep massaging and going on about your day. If it's intense, like find out if that client wants to continue or stop the session. but keeping that client focused on the present moment and the here and now by encouraging them to breathe, maybe keep their eyes open, and you stay out of the release. Refrain from questions to probe it, like, do you know why you felt sad when I touched your leg? And then educate them, again, referring to counseling or therapy, and that can also help with those emotions that come up with touch therapy. We have reflective listening as an important part of communication. It's also called active listening. So we learn how to understand what's being said from the speaker's point of view, and then create a statement that summarizes and reflects the essence of the person's message. So as they're talking and communicating with you, you would respond by starting phrases like you think, you feel, you're saying, your point of view. So like you have a client who's expressing that when they are at their job, they end up with a lot of tension, headaches. And so that also like triggers migraines. And so you're like, okay, so you think that your work and the stress from work causes these headaches. And then you go from there. So that way they are being heard. You're not, and if there is some confusion at that point, they can redirect you and say, no, actually, this is what I think. We also are going to be aware of body language, like tensing up the body and the limbs, holding the breath, and making faces. There is an example of this on page 69 in the reading. And on 75, I love this example. Like the best advice is to read all body language, be in touch with the client, and assertive if a client is doing something too that you don't like. So check out the readings on that and let me know if you have any questions around communication. You can also ask them in your discussion board post this week. And then lastly, we have our dual relationships and how that pertains to our code of ethics. So this kind of goes into our boundary conversation. So with dual relationships, this is when we have the overlapping of professional and social roles and interactions between two people. Happens all the time. It is not just through sexual relationships. You might be friends with somebody who's also then your client. You might live in the same town, or you've maybe worked together in the past. So dual relationships can be really hard to juggle. They can also be damaging to a relationship in your business, but dual relationships can also enhance the therapeutic relationship. Like the better that you know the person, the easier it is to navigate his idiosyncrasies. Oh, this person is really quick to getting angry, and that leads to a lot of muscular tension or something like that. So by doing this, we increase our compassion and notice how they use their body and alter treatments based on our observations. There's a huge range of dual relationships. So we have like our socializing, which can be like unplanned personal interaction outside of therapy time. You might just be in the grocery store or out to dinner. You're invited to a group setting, this group affiliation, and you attend an activity and you have clients there. Friendships can be difficult to have a professional relationship with. I'll just give like a pretty like general example of like when I would have my friends come and receive massage from me, especially if we hadn't seen each other in a long time and we were trying to catch up. It always felt like I was talking, they were talking, and it wasn't this effective therapeutic massage happening. So I would say to them, why don't we book your massage, and then afterwards, let's catch up with coffee or lunch, and then we can chat and do all of that then. Is it ideal, and can you do it every single time? Probably not, especially if you don't have your own business. but it would allow for a much more therapeutic massage to happen, knowing that we had that time afterwards to catch up. And then as far as dating, boundaries really blur here. So I do not recommend, neither does New York State, dating any of your clients, because now, like, to take money in exchange for physical touch, and then you're also like dating them and touching them, it's not ideal. The boundaries get really blurred, and it's not to say that you can't massage your partner that you date, but to do it professionally and to take money from them, that's where the boundaries become really difficult. And then sex can have a really harsh impact on the professional relationship. So again, terminating that relationship with your client before you engage in dating or sex. And then family, that's going to be different for everybody, right? I always like to tell people too, like, I don't give anybody free massages, but like, just for example, with my mom, she loves to get massages from me. I would just always give her a gift card on holidays. So it's like she never really paid for one, but they were always like a gift. That's up to you and how you feel comfortable with all of that. Maybe you do just have rules in place where you don't massage family or whatever, because you're all different, and whatever is best for you, and maybe you have to just create stern boundaries in the beginning, and then they become more flexible. Sometimes it's hard to become more stern if you start off flexible. And what are the risks of dual relationships? So we have not only professional risks and associations, but when it comes to sexual, there can be illegal consequences when it comes to that. And again, like I gave the example of, okay, well, now you break up and maybe you have a disgruntled partner who then tries to create allegations that there was like sexual harassment happening in the professional setting. And so just being aware of like the intimacy level that you have with clients, knowing what a power differential is. If you don't know what that is by now, I really highly recommend you look that up. We've talked a lot about that term over the last couple of years. And who's accountable for what in the relationship? Well, you are the professional as the massage therapist, so you have a much higher level of accountability. What's the relative maturity level? So those are questions to ask when it comes to the dual relationship. And what are the consequences of non-participation? So are there any if you don't participate in this relationship? Or is it negative, positive? What's the consequence? So hopefully that was helpful. And going through the notes, reach out if you have any questions, and make sure you do your activities for module 2. Have a nice day, everyone.